Hello, and welcome to this episode of Not a Lady, a Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman podcast. This is Kelly.
And I'm Sarah.
And this is episode 17 of season 1, titled Portraits.
Welcome back, Not a Lady podcast.
Yeah, it's been a little while, guys.
Sorry for, again, our unintentional hiatus. Basically, we thought we had it all together. I moved, Kelly's finishing up school, and then what is this world that we live in right now? But Kelly, before I say anything else, I want to give you a big congratulations on completing your first year of physician assistant school.
Thank you very much. It kind of was anticlimactic, to be honest, because we just rolled into clinicals and not much changed, but it's kind of crazy because I remember telling Mom, like, oh, you can do anything for a year. Like, if you can get through a year of didactic and then a year of clinicals, like, you can do anything for a year. I can't believe it's been a year, but thank you. I appreciate that.
What a weird year,
It was hard. Yeah, it's been hard. I'm not even going to lie. Probably the fastest and one of the hardest years of my life.
But you know what made it better?
This podcast.
Oh, no, I was going to say having me in your life.
I've had that for 25 years, so...
Well, you're welcome.
Sorry, that's what you wanted me to say. Thank you.
Let's talk about how everyone was laughing at how much of a fangirl I was over Joseph Gordon-Levitt, but basically everyone agrees.
That's true. A lot of people were like, yeah, I love him.
You know what I forgot to mention, though? So many people wrote in and were like, you forgot one of his coolest movies, which is Inception. And I was like, I totally didn't even mention Inception.
Honestly, I didn't remember that he was in that. I couldn't tell you one person that's in that other than
Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah. I mean, Leo is the title character. And another child star who rose out of the 90s, of course.
But he's not in this episode, so we will not be talking about him. Okay, lessons.
That was a terrible transition, but okay, yeah, let's roll with it. Lessons we learned. First off, Leonardo DiCaprio has never been in Dr. Quinn season 1.
I have a lesson here from Arwina102 who says, I think the main lesson from this episode is that Hank is human too. People are not black and white. Most of the time, the same person is capable of both good and bad deeds, and lots of this depends on the circumstances they are in. It's easy to judge Hank as an evil man who's exploiting Myra and the other girls for money, but the reality is never that simple. She also said that later in this episode, we kind of see that sometimes Hank's mean behavior is also a way for him to hide behind what he really feels, like when he's pretending he doesn't care about Zach.
Hank is complicated.
Yeah, and we had also talked a little bit about how it was nice to see that side of Hank, because I think we do put him in this box of, like, you're the icky guy we don't like, but shocking, he has emotions too. Who knew?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that can be said of most of the characters on Dr. Quinn, heroes or villains alike, right? They are complicated. And that's very realistic. A little sad, because I think sometimes in storytelling, we want characters to grow and be better, but in reality, like, that's not life. Like, sometimes people don't change, even though they do learn lessons and have really redeeming moments. So yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I appreciate the exploration that The Secret did into Hank as a character. On Instagram, Jenny from the Hollow, her lesson had to do with, we learned how completely comfortable Michaela and Sully are riding together, especially on the buggy at the beginning. She also said we learned that apparently men complaining about women's driving transcends all time.
Yes.
They always have and always will, even if it's with horse and buggy. And then she also wrote, there's a subtle moment at the beginning of this part that I've always loved and I don't think you mentioned. When they start to go into Miss Ruby's cabin, Sully notices something's not right, and his first instinct is to grab Michaela's arm and stop her in case something inside might hurt her. It's a quick moment, but I've always liked that. Which I was like, I didn't notice that.
I didn't catch that.
It's subtle, showing definitely their relationship and what's gonna come out in portraits that it's not like any of us didn't know, except maybe our two main characters.
Right. A grateful fan wrote in to us by email and said, I think a continual lesson for Dr. Mike is that her opinion may not always be the right one and or even what other wants. She may be doctor of the town or most knowledgeable around, but that doesn't mean you are the keeper of all good decisions, even when it's with good intentions. Especially when others think schools are for sissies and she may not agree.
Yes.
She said she also learned that as much as she loves Brian, he is not perfect. He definitely had the opportunity to speak up, but I'm going to give him a pass because of his age, his cute face, and his genuine heart. Which, yes,
Yeah.
we love Brian. But I think we did bring that up. Definitely nobody's perfect.
On Instagram, Fran Giopani00 had a bit of trivia. Melissa Flores, Erica's sister, portrays Missy in Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, and in this episode, I think she is the schoolgirl with the dark curly hair and glasses sitting beside Alice in class, who says, Brian drew that? I didn't actually fact check this trivia, so I don't know if it's true, but if it is true, it's cool. Fran also added a really fascinating analysis of the buggy wagon ride scene, which I think not only speaks to Dr. Sully, wow, Dr. Sully and Mike's relationship. I'm keeping it. You know how we had that conversation in Rite of Passage? I believe it was right after they had their kiss, where everyone was like, hey, you're missing. They're not actually talking about Ingrid and Matthew. They're talking about themselves.
Right.
So Fran has pulled out that they have done this again, which I'm totally in support of. If this is a consistent thing where they talk around their own relationship through other means. And so Fran said, I'm not sure if this was intended, but I felt that the conversation in the wagon in the opening scene, Sully could have been alluding to their developing romantic relationship. Anyone else get that? For example, the lines, Michaela, what's wrong with my driving? The driving could be her approach to their developing relationship. Sully, you could give the horse a little more rein, which could be translated as, you could loosen up a little. Michaela says, are you saying I'm driving too slow? Is she asking if he's saying she's moving too slow in the relationship?
Right.
Sully says, no, I'm just saying you could let the horse go at its own pace if you wanted, which could be him saying sometimes you could relax a little and allow things to move forward at a natural pace.
I like that.
Yeah, and I want to dive in deeper, like maybe his idea of giving the horse control a little bit really is more about her letting go of her control, because we know she has this thing about having trouble asking for help. She's definitely like strong, firm, opinionated, right? So like letting go a little bit and being like, hey, maybe I don't have to control every piece of this. I just thought was actually a really interesting analysis of that scene, and actually makes it better because then it's not about him just critiquing her driving.
I like that a lot. And honestly, that will be, if we think of it that way, it'll be interesting how that carries over in this and what develops in this episode.
So that is all our lessons for The Secret. Thank you to everyone who wrote in. Shall we talk about portraits? Are you ready for Kenny Rogers?
Yes, I'm always ready for Kenny Rogers. Come on now.
Season 1, Episode 17, titled Portraits, aired on the 22nd of May, 1993. The director was Chuck Bowman, the guy who's directed the most number of episodes in Season 1. This is his 7th out of what he will go on to do 32 stints as director. The last time he directed was Rite of Passage. The writer was Joseph Anderson. This is his 3rd writing credit. The previous episode that he wrote for was The Prisoner. Obviously, Beth Sullivan gets creator credit. Would you like to open on our first scene?
Sure. We open up. We are somewhere, I don't want to say out in the wilderness, but we're not in town. And we quickly learn that Mr. Watkins is here, and he is trying to photograph the Cheyenne. He's a photographer. Sully is there kind of helping this interaction happen, since we've seen him multiple times kind of be a middleman between the Cheyenne and the townsfolk. But he's actually taking a picture of the dog soldiers, and we get a little bit of background with that. What does he actually say that the
The Army calls them dog soldiers. The Cheyenne translation of their title, which Sully, I believe, says in Cheyenne, but it translates to last hope.
Right.
I hate to start off on a sour note, but I really don't like this scene. And it's not because, I mean, we should say Mr. Daniel Watkins, played by Kenny Rogers, 54 at the time, Grammy award-winning singer, songwriter, actor, record producer, entrepreneur, right? He's cool. He looks a little bit like Santa Claus in like the best way. He's like a jolly old man. But I wonder if we'll talk more about this in our Roundup episode, but I've been thinking a lot about Native representation in film recently. And I think a huge part of my interest in it is, of course, due to revisiting Dr. Quinn. I don't mind that we have Watkins taking photos of these Cheyenne warriors. I think it makes sense that Sully's been brought in as a translator. What I kind of hate is that they set up this picture and how it represents these soldiers, and that he goes to take the picture and they react kind of in fear. They start throwing rocks at the camera, they're yelling, and Sully has to like get in and save Watkins and get the Native Americans under control. And when I think about the representation of this, of these indigenous people being, in a way, it makes them look kind of foolish. And they give this like excuse like, oh, they thought the lens looks like a gun barrel, which it doesn't. And I don't really find it believable that these Native characters, who I'm sure have seen, you know, the soldiers with guns, would actually react in that way. And so I asked myself, like, why did they do this? Why did they have him react in that way? Or why do they have these natives that Watkins is taking a picture of react in that way? And it's simply because they want Mr. Watkins to get injured so that he has a reason to go to the doctor. And I almost wish like we could still do the history. You know, I hate that Watkins calls the dog soldiers renegades. Like, what are these renegades called? And then that's how they set up Sully saying, oh, well, the Army calls them dog soldiers, but the Cheyenne call them the last hope. And they used to fight each other, but now they stand against, you know, U.S. military. If you want Watkins to get hurt, but the way you're going to do it is have these like Native Americans react like really just it's just not, it's not good representation here. Why don't you have him, they're in the wilderness, he's a city guy, like why don't you have him fall and hit his head or like trip and, you know, like hurt his arm or something. Like there's so many other ways that you could get him injured being out in the wilderness with Sully as his guide, that he needs to go to the doctor. I really don't like that we're using indigenous representation and this very white perspective of a barbaric, uncivilized culture, because that's how we would see them, to react, you know, in this way to a camera. And I don't believe it was intentional, but this is one of those times where I'm looking and being like, this was obviously written from, you know, a non-Native perspective. I think it's a little problematic in its representation of Native peoples. And like then Watkins like starts to yell at Sully like, you better get them in line. And I'm like, hey.
Yeah, he does get mad.
This man, not for the rest of the show, is not going to react like that.
Yeah, he's well-tempered.
It really seems not only out of character for what we see the rest of the episode, but it's when we first meet him. And then we have Sully kind of dumbing it down for the Cheyenne. I think this scene was poorly executed. If the intention was to have some background on Watkins, to have the connection of Sully helping him, and then also, you know, want to give some insight into the dog soldiers, which we have talked about on this podcast before. I'm thinking of the many Native and Indigenous people that have to deal with this kind of representation all the time, and I want to be considerate and be like, this was a bad move. Representation is important, and especially since this is a story of the West, and there are a lot of minority groups featured in this show, and I think sometimes they get that representation right, but this is not one of those instances.
Yeah, definitely probably could have been done better. Right after this, we have our title sequence with no narration, the last one we will see of this season. And then we are at Dr. Mike's clinic. And like you said, Watkins is obviously there. But it's kind of neat. I always kind of like seeing Dr. Quinn's like interactions with people who are from places other than the West. Do you know what I mean? Like people that are more like
outsiders.
Yeah, you know, because then she starts making this connection that she saw some photos when she went to the National Gallery and just making some connections there about certain people that he's worked with and such. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I actually have a lot to say, not just like history. I will just add this one thing. So we find out Watkins obviously is doing geographical photography for the railroad. And Dr. Quinn, she makes this comment, and I think it just ended up in the writing, but it's really bad. But she's like, oh, maybe you should stick to geography. It's less dangerous than Indians. That is what she says. And I'm reeling that A, that's a line at all, and
right.
B, that's what Dr. Mike, who we know, this is a woman who goes to the reservation to like help the natives, who has, we know, the utmost respect for cloud dancing. And I just feel like it's really inappropriate, problematic comment. But we're moving on from it because I want to talk about Watkins. This is where we get Watkins' backstory. So she does mention that she's been to the National Gallery, which I believe this would be the National Gallery of Art. And she mentions seeing a picture of Daniel Webster. If you're not a history person, I don't know why you would really know who Daniel Webster is. You might think, oh, Webster, like the dictionary, but no, it's not that Webster. Daniel Webster was a speaker and politician, a Revolutionary War veteran, and he's probably most known for his role in the Compromise of 1850, which was a collection of 5 bills that was created to resolve slavery disputes in the territories during the post-Mexican-American War. So he is a little bit of a controversial figure, but I definitely recommend Googling him, because if you see the picture of him, it actually makes sense, the comment that Dr. Quinn makes. If you type in Daniel Webster, like the first portrait that comes up, you're like,
he looks angry.
He looks kind of scary. Right? So I appreciate that, what her comment about the picture, like obviously they actually pulled from that picture where he does look scary. Yeah. She asks Watkins if he's still working for Matthew Brady, which again,
the Brady Bunch. It's the guy from the Brady Bunch. You didn't know?
No. Actually, Matthew Brady was a 19th-century American photographer who is most well known for, he underwent a huge initiative to photograph the Civil War. So much so that he decided he wanted to chronicle the Civil War. He hired over 20 photographers to travel with the military during the Civil War and photograph life in the camps, post-battle, pre-battle. So a lot of the photographs that we have from the Civil War were done either by him or any of his like 20 hired photographers. So I think the assumption here is that
Watkins was one of them.
Yeah, was one of those 20. What's kind of sad, Brady put all his money into this initiative to like chronicle the war, and he really believed that the government was going to buy his photographs at the end of it, and really he was going to get his investment back on, you know, chronicling this chapter of history. And actually the government had no interest in his photos at the time, which part of me gets, because I guess they were recovering from a war and wars are expensive enough without the photos from it. But he actually went bankrupt after this because no one wanted his photographs. And I think about now how precious those photos that we have of his and those who, you know, worked for him, how precious they are. And it's just so interesting.
Right.
How the value of history, like when we don't appreciate history when it's being made, right? It's not until it's long gone. And so it's so interesting, like he sunk his finances into this commitment and lost everything. And so it's interesting then that Watkins obviously went from, shooting the war to now he's working for the railroad and taking photographs to kind of for them to get an idea of the area, I guess, for building the railroad, which is consistent with what we've learned. About, what's going on in the West.
And Sully's his guide.
And he compliments Sully, and Dr. Quinn is all praise for Sully.
She says, you couldn't find a better guide.
And then he talks about wanting to photograph Dr. Quinn, which it's kind of, she says her life is ordinary, but I don't think there's anything about being a woman doctor on the frontier that should be considered ordinary, even by her.
She's modest.
Yeah, and then he mentions, like, I think it would be so fascinating to the stereoscopic viewer. Do you know the word stereoscopic?
Is it dumb if I say no?
I don't think it's dumb, because I was like, I don't know that I know what that is. Stereoscopic is actually the intellectually correct way of saying 3D.
Oh, okay.
So it has to do with, like, 3D imagery. Like, 2D, we know what 2D is, right? Like, but 3D is built off of this idea that we see in 3D because we look from our right eye and our left eye. And so stereoscopic film or photography was built on lenses that have that same depth, right? Which is how, if you look at, like, older pictures, you might see a change from, like, what would have created a 2D image versus a 3D image, which I also, when I think of 3D now, we also think of, like, reaching through the screen, but that's not what it initially was. Initially, it more had to do with the lenses. You know how when you, like, close one eye, it looks different than when you have both eyes open, like what you can see around things because we have two eyes. I don't know if I'm making any sense in my explaining of this, but so the stereoscopic viewer would be people who are seeing photographs that are taken in a more or less, like, early 3D model.
Right.
Tell me that's really interesting.
Yeah. But there is kind of like this weird moment where you feel like he's flirting with Dr. Mike. Did you? And then, like, Sully looks uncomfortable, and then I'm like, dude, you're kind of, like, old.
Why do they always have the singers who guest star on Dr. Quinn always flirt with Dr. Quinn? Like, think about Johnny Cash and John Schneider,
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like, does he not know, like, that he's old? I don't know. I guess it's a different era, but
I don't for a second believe that Sully should or would be jealous or intimidated by frail little Daniel Watkins.
Yeah, but he does look, like, uncomfortable, like, in that scene or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's true.
The next scene, we're actually outside at the quilting circle, and we find out that Emily is getting married and moving to Denver, which, again, flashback to what? The first episode when her husband died? That wasn't the first episode, was it?
The epidemic. He was the...
Yeah, Sam. He died. Anyway, so they're talking about that, but they're also doing the quilting circle because they're going to have their picture taken. And the idea comes up that they should have a picture of the whole town. And unfortunately, our friend Olive feels that the picture of the town, the entire town, should only be the leading citizens and important people. And Mike brings up a good point, like, well, that doesn't include me, really, and what about the immigrants? And before even that conversation can kind of conclude, which we'll see this throughout this episode, that conversation continue, but it's kind of funny because Colleen runs over and says that someone's having a baby, but Dr. Mike is still trying to smile for the photo, in which we know are not like the photos we have today, where you not even less than a second and it's over. Yeah, you have to hold still. Her face, though, when she's, like, trying to, like, smile, but also, like, clearly, like, needs to go, is really funny to me. So then, of course, we skip ahead to that. We see Dr. Mike helping with another childbirth. This one, not a C-section. Kind of cool to watch.
Well, that was what was kind of interesting to me. I mean, you know more about babies being born than I do because you worked in, like, a proper maternity ward and stuff. But I'm like, why is Colleen running over? Like, the baby's about to pop out right now. Like, from my understanding, you start feeling contractions at least a significant amount of a time. It's not like, oh, bam, baby.
a doctor would need to be present for that. I mean, like, yes, in today's society, they kind of do just show up at the moment of delivery. That's kind of how it happens. But, I mean, yeah, it's a lengthy process, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you want to feel the position that the baby is in and all sorts of stuff. So, no, it's totally necessary if she's in labor to kind of start that. But, yeah, no, I do agree. But she's a good doctor. She would run even if it wasn't an emergency.
Mrs. Eklund, the mother in this scene, is played by Kathy Worthington, who I just went to see what else Kathy Worthington had been in, but actually what's interesting is she will be a different townsperson in 3 different episodes of Dr. Quinn.
Okay, so she's one of the regular extras.
This won't be the last time we see her, but she won't be Mrs. Eklund again.
Interesting. Well, what's even funnier is the fact that Watkins wants to get a picture of her, I guess, like, actively in birth, which also, what mom would consent to that? I don't know. Obviously he misses it, like, the baby is finally delivered, because Dr. Mike says, like, we can't wait, we're not gonna wait for you to take a picture. But then it kind of blew my mind, they pull the curtain back, and then she's just, like, there with the baby, and there's, like, a bunch of people watching, like, it's some sort of, like, show. I was like, wow, you're a nice mom. Most moms, after she push a baby out, like...
Yeah. I always thought the picture at the end was actually the plan, but he was worried about missing it altogether because they open the curtain and it's like ready and he's like, okay, Colleen there, Dr. Mike there, okay, and picture.
Yeah, maybe you're right. For some reason, he made it seem like he didn't want to miss, like, the actual birth, like he wanted to get her, like, in labor, which I was
right.
Like, sorry, in what universe is that going to be allowed to be shown somewhere? But anyway... Unfortunately, we then see him shattering the picture because the glass had a crack.
And she notices he's, like, squinting and limping a little bit, but it's more just, like, mentioned in passing. I think it's not something we're meant to, like, super take note of other than Dr. Mike clocks it.
Right. He just writes it off as, it's a place where his foot rubs his boot.
And then we get the first of what will be many actual, it looks like, old-timey photos that they're actually just going to show in the episode, which I think is a really interesting choice because it definitely, like, slows the pace of the episode every time they have this picture. So it's interesting that this is something that they're like, okay, we're going to have this photographer come. I just wonder, other than the emotional payoff at the end when we get, like, the picture of the whole town, it's like, I wonder what the thought was actually having the characters or the actors pose for these, fake old-timey pictures that obviously Watkins is taking. Like, it's a really interesting choice because they could have told the whole story and never shown a screenshot of, I call it a screenshot in the modern world, but not a screenshot, but, like, the print of the picture. I don't know.
It's neat, though, and I'm glad it's a part, for sure.
We didn't mention earlier, but she had asked him to stay a couple days, which is why he ended up taking more pictures, but he decides to kind of host an outdoor gallery of a lot of his photography, and Brian is selling tickets, and Lauren seems to be, like, hosting it in some way, or I don't know if he's on, like, security patrol, because he, like, makes a comment that there's a lady in there that's been in there for too long, and Brian should charge her more if she stays longer. I don't know, it's just a weird little cutaway scene.
Yeah. Classic Lauren. We then kind of switch over to Brace Mercantile, where Olive is like, you should hear some of the stuff these people are saying, like, horrible things about people and their pictures. She's talking about, like, in the little gallery that they have set up, which, probably for a lot of people is their first time ever even seeing a photo. But I'm like, a lot probably hasn't changed because people still say horrible things about each other in photos today. But... there is then continued conversation about the town picture. And Dr. Mike is there and when we should have it and all this stuff. And who brings up the fact, I think it might be Matthew, that Robert E.'s not coming back in town?
It's Dr. Mike says, let's do it next week. And then they're like, well, why not tomorrow? And she's like, well, because Robert E.'s not around. Lauren's like, who cares? And I know that Robert E. and Grace are, like, the black characters that we, like, know the most and care about, but it feels so personal when I think the idea is supposed to be they're objecting to any black people being in the picture, but for some reason we always use like Robert E's name specifically, and so it just kind of bothers me because I'm like, we know that you don't hate Robert E, right?
Right.
You just are racist because he's black. So why does it always have to be like, well, we don't care if Robert E's back, when really the problem is that they just don't care about any black people being in the picture. It seems so mean that Robert E and Grace, and I guess it's just the nature of like having a large cast of characters, like they are the face of showing white discrimination and racism. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's, I don't know, sometimes it just feels like it gets old to me, where I'm like, are we still doing this? Seriously? Like,
totally. And kind of like we mentioned with talking about in The Secret, it is realistic because in real life, sometimes people don't change, right? And don't get better. But for our characters, we've seen them supposedly grow and change, and then to have them, like revert back to these same things. I mean, maybe this is another like representation discussion, because later when they talk about the immigrants, it's like all the immigrants. And of course, Ingrid gets brought up with Matthew because she is, his fiance kind of thing, but like, it's not like that for Robert E and Grace. Like, it's always just about them. It's never about like the black community, I guess, as a whole, like the first time we even really found out that there were other black characters was with the Operation, where it was like talking about their shack church or whatever, and I was like, that's the first time we've really heard that there is a black community in Colorado Springs. Is there a way, obviously this is very intentional, like Dr. Mike pushing against these just ideals of racism and discrimination. Like, obviously, it's so intentional, but it does feel almost unfair in a way that Robert E. is almost like the poster child of, let's discriminate against black people, Robert E.,
Yeah, for sure. But they don't even finish that conversation. Once again, an important discussion is interrupted because we find out that Horace's mother is sick, and we have the return of Lewis here. I don't know if you noticed that. Lewis hasn't been around. Lewis returns for this episode. But they bring Horace's mom in to the clinic. There's this awkward moment where Myra kind of runs up, and Horace basically pretends not to know her. He's like, we have a medical emergency here, ma'am.
Yeah.
Very obviously like, hey, that's your fiance, by the way, but you definitely just spoke to her like you're either ashamed of her. Obviously, in this case, he doesn't want his mom to know, which, again, we'll see in the next scene a little bit, but we don't know what's wrong with Horace's mom. Dr. Mike doesn't know. Dr. Mike just knows that she has a fever, there's an obvious infection, which anytime you think fever infection, you always think about
COVID.
Wow, what a world do we live in. I mean, you're not wrong.
I'm just kidding. Sepsis.
Yes. But I mean, we won't ever figure out what's wrong with her, but I mean, Dr. Mike says it could be anything from tick-borne disease to kidney stones. But yes, she has a weak heart.
So Mrs. Bing, played by Rosemary Murphy, German actress, most famous for her role in 1962's To Kill a Mockingbird, which most of you probably watched in school.
I actually didn't.
You didn't? Did you read the book?
And we didn't have to read the book. No, we didn't. I never had to read that.
Well, there goes your classic American literature education.
You obviously weren't my English teacher.
I've actually never taught it either, though. That's the thing. I've never taught it.
Okay.
But that's not on me. That's more on just the curriculum of the schools I've been in.
Schools you've worked at.
But I feel like people should read it. And it's very relevant to our discussion of historic racism and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Back to Kenny Rogers being drunk outside the saloon.
This scene is problematic.
Are you not going to like this episode? Because I like this episode, but I have a feeling you're not going to like it. This will be interesting.
I like this episode, but I think there's a lot of problematic issues. Do you know the song that he's singing?
I didn't pay attention to that. Is he singing The Gambler by Kenny Rogers?
No, that's my point. My point is, you have stinking Kenny Rogers, right? You had John Snyder, who sang a lullaby, an original lullaby. You had Johnny Cash singing, I don't remember what he sang, but it was a nice song that he just was singing. And then you have Kenny Rogers sitting drunk, and I get that he's drunk, and so obviously they wanted to pick a song that was, I was going to say
a drinking
drunkish,
song.
But he's singing Blue Tail Fly, also called Jimmy Crack Corn. Do you know what historically what a Jimmy is? It is a old Southern plantation word for a slave. And literally the song Blue Tail Fly was created for blackface minstrelsy in 1840. So when white men would put on blackface and perform a comedy show, and they would sing this song, which this song is about a black slave whose master has died. And there's a couple interpretations of, like, to crack corn could mean, like, he's kind of celebrating that his master died, and so he went in, and crack corn could be, like, opening up his master's, like, alcohol and drinking. It also could be slang for, like, gossiping, but it's not only a song that was performed with blackface, but it's also, like, about slavery, which I just think doesn't make sense for this character, which we're going to present as someone who is happy to photograph everyone, right? There's such this big deal. And so I'm like, why did they pick this song?
Don't you think it's similar now that people sing songs that they don't know what they mean about? People watching this show probably did not researching the song that Kenny Rogers sang in that one episode. So I don't know. I kind of feel like we don't really know a lot about this character. So yes, he's comfortable photographing everyone, but we don't know his background. We don't really know his beliefs. So
fair for within the story, even though I would argue like that we know this is post-Civil War, so this song is not old by then. Sure, maybe Watkins is drunk. He doesn't really know what he's singing. But my problem is the writers who picked for this song for him to sing either did know or should have known, because it's probably meant to be context, right? Like that this was a song that was popular in the 1840s, but like blackface about slavery, like no, they don't get a fly on this one. This is a problematic choice.
I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying like a lot of people probably didn't think that deep into it.
That's what normalizes things like this, right? That we just don't think about it.
Yeah.
But we should. Anyway, continuing with the point of the scene is he's drunk, soaking his foot in the horse water trough.
Yes, which obviously is not clean, and Dr. Mike points that out. But she says, like, I want to examine your foot. Obviously, it is bothering you. And they kind of have a quick interaction about, like, why did you become a doctor? Well, why did you become a photographer? Because you're good at it. And we also have a weird Sully appearance around the corner where he seems, like, suspicious or something. I'm not really sure.
We haven't said this in a while. Where did he come from, and why was he, like, was he waiting outside the clinic to walk her home or something? Like,
I'm also like, dude, don't be jealous. He's drunk and has a nasty foot in like dirty water. Like, trust me, she's not like, oh, wow.
I don't understand this choice that they made to have Sully. Yeah, like, why is he skulking, and why does he seem like pouting that she literally is doing her doctor thing? Like, how many times has she said, I want to look at this issue, even though you've told me it's not an issue? Like, that's the most normal Dr. Quinn thing ever. And then to have him, like, randomly come from the corner with his little pouty face. And I'm like, what?
It's weird. But they end up going inside the clinic, and she's observing his eyes, doing a fundoscopic exam with a candle, which I can barely do that with an ophthalmoscope. So the fact that she can see the back of his retina and look at the blood vessels with the candles, impressive to me. But he's like weirdly complimenting Dr. Mike, and I just keep thinking like, you're old.
I don't think we've ever talked about Jane Seymour's heterochromia. Jane Seymour has a blue eye and a green eye, and he's like, you have really pretty eyes. It's hard not to notice them when they're in front of me.
Oh, she does? I didn't know she had that. I never noticed that.
Which I actually used to think that like heterochromia was like mostly Like, you see it a lot in, like, huskies, right? That have, like, blue and brown eyes. It's just interesting, like, because I feel like they've never really talked about it before. But then I was like, is this them trying to talk about her very unique eye color?
Or is it supposed to be talk about his eyes?
It's so weird. Who wrote this episode and was like, you know what? Kenny Rogers is coming on Dr. Quinn. You know what we're going to have him do? Flirt with Jane Seymour like nobody's business.
No, it's the character. See, I don't like when you do that. They don't get to pick their character, probably.
No, I'm blaming the writers because I don't understand who... Like, Johnny Cash's character made sense. I don't understand what Joseph Anderson, when he was writing these scenes, he was like, you know what would be awesome to see Kenny Rogers drunk talking about Dr. Quinn's pretty eyes.
Well, in case you guys want to know about eyeballs, Dr. Mike realizes, she tells him that there's damage to the blood vessels of his retina, which it is a pretty cool thing, and I haven't actually, this is sad, but I haven't seen it. I've done plenty of fundoscopic exams, but it's really hard to actually be able to see the retina. And I actually asked an ophthalmologist about it when we had ophthalmology module, and he's like, it's really difficult unless the patient has their eyes dilated, but you can actually see the blood vessels on the back of that person's eyeball that connect to the optic nerve, and we've even talked about the optic nerve on this show.
Let me ask you a question. If he was drunk, would his eyes be dilated?
So alcohol is a depressant, so it would dilate your eyes, but not if you're trying to make a case for that's why she saw it easier. I'm not sure that would be super convincing.
Yeah.
Not like crazy dilated, like when you get dilating drops at the eye doctor, obviously.
Where you can't see to drive home.
But she tells him that she thinks he has diabetes mellitus. Which, no, shouldn't even say, I would say diabetes mellitus.
Her English accent came out.
Also known as Sweetwater back in the day. I think most people, if you're not familiar with diabetes or heard of diabetes, I'd be pretty shocked. But to give a quick lesson, diabetes type 1 is a type that most people are born with and find out pretty early. Not always, but a lot of people are younger, finding out that their beta cells in their pancreas is what secretes insulin, and that their beta cells are broken. They do not do that.
And type 1 has nothing to do with what they ate?
No, lifestyle choices.
Lifestyle?
No.
Or I think a lot of people don't know that, and I think it's important. Type 1 is kind of, would you describe it as hereditary?
Yeah.
Like, you can't control, you might inherit
it. It is. Type 2 would be, let's say you have so much sugar.
Donuts.
And you overload your body with that sugar, so your body has to say, okay, pancreas, release insulin. If you do that enough times, guess what? Your pancreas is probably not going to do a great job of secreting insulin. And so now you're going to have the same issues, but in a different way. And so this guy is probably, how old did you say he was? 50-something in this episode? I mean, I don't know how old they intended the character to be.
Kenny Rogers was 54.
Obviously, this is a type 2 case, and what happens, I don't think people realize, is that with all that sugar in your bloodstream, it actually damages your arteries. And the first arteries it's probably going to damage is involved in your eyes, in your kidneys, even your extremities. So that's why you get poor wound healing. In this case, he has like ulcers on his foot. It also affects your nerves so that your nerves don't respond in the same way that they should. So a lot of people don't even know that they have ulcers because they don't even feel it anymore. And then they realize they've had all this progression. And so those are usually late stages, like late stage signs. You know, if someone were to present with that now, that's very uncontrolled diabetes. Most people that live in America have more controlled diabetes, or at least access to control.
Because I know type 1's not curable. Is type 2 like...
No. Once you have it, you have it. It can be well controlled. There are people that have type 2 diabetes that it is well controlled. There's also people with type 1 diabetes who are not well controlled. So there are tons of drugs on the market that you can do for type 2, and a lot of them act on different things. They can act on carbohydrate absorption. They can act on actually producing more more insulin. There's a ton. And eventually, if people progress, then they have to be insulin dependent, which obviously type 1 are automatically insulin dependent. once you have diabetes, you have diabetes. You can't, like, get rid of it. Which people do think that, trust me.
Once the damage is there, right? Like,
In this specific case, like, he's in late stage. And it is true that, you know, you're just going to keep progressing and progressing and progressing. And so, like I said, nowadays we have plenty of, like, oral drugs we can give. And then eventually, if you progress, we can give insulin. That's not an option at this point in time. Insulin wasn't actually discovered till 1921. So before that, most people with diabetes die. Which Dr. Quinn goes on to explain this and tell him that she can give him something to relieve his symptoms, but the disease will continue to progress, and eventually his eyesight will decline so much that he'll probably, what she says is, you're going blind. No offense, in my opinion, there's a lot other things that are going to happen involving, like I said, your kidneys, even your brain. Like, there's so many other things that are affected as well, but I think because it's so important for his profession that's what she decides to kind of focus on.
Yeah. Actually, I'm glad that you kind of explained too. I didn't really understand the relation between the sore on his foot and diabetes. So having you explain, like, oh, it's because they lose some of that nerve feeling, and so yeah, like, it doesn't heal in time. So that was you explaining that made me be like, oh, so that's why limping or having a sore on your foot, like, I get blisters sometimes, you know, like, that's totally normal, but
it's ulcers.
The fact that he's had it for so long and it's not healing, that's really enlightening.
Yeah, and like I said, it has to do with those arteries. Those arteries get damaged, and arteries involved in how many places in your body, but how are they going to be negatively affected then if that's happening and your body's so overloaded with sugar?
They kind of leave that scene with her giving him the bad news pretty abruptly. There's not really a conclusion to the conversation. And they transition to what I would assume is the next morning, where Dr. Mike is in the gallery and she's looking at some of his Civil War photography. She spots who she thinks in the picture could be her fiance, David Lewis. Watkins, I guess, out of care for her, is like, yeah, I think that was his name. And then it's kind of weird to me because, like, it's like they didn't finish their conversation last night, and all of a sudden the next morning they're like continuing their conversation. Yeah. It's like, wow, that was a long break to keep conversation going, because then he's like, so what's gonna happen to me? And I'm like, wait, you didn't ask that
honestly,
last night.
Though, it's interesting, like, we learned in school, like, sometimes it's better, like, when you give someone, like, obviously, I don't want to say this isn't a terminal diagnosis, but it kind of is in his case. Like, a lot of times it's better not to give everyone all this overwhelming information about, like, here's everything about your diagnosis, here's how we're going to treat you. Like, it's good to take it in waves.
Her treatment plan is that he should go to New York, and there are doctors, specialized doctors, who can help him with diet and lifestyle and whatever, and maybe give him longer life, where maybe they can slow some of the progression of the disease, all that kind of thing. He has made the decision that he's going to live his life to the fullest and make the most of the time he has left and the body he has for as long as he has it. The scene ends with him asking if he can take her portrait, which was confusing to me because I thought he had already asked that earlier.
He's like,
and she was like,
confirming, like, let's make it happen right now.
Yeah. I was like, wait, what? And so we have another put in print of her portrait.
Yes, then we're in the saloon.
Horace does come to apologize to Myra, which is nice. Like, he recognizes that he kind of was kind of
mean,
cruel.
Yeah.
She definitely seems embarrassed. I think not just embarrassed that it happened, but also embarrassed by his reaction.
Because it's not very Horace-like.
No, he's never been like that with her.
And that's why he says, like, I want to introduce you, but, like, Mom won't understand us getting married, and it's not the right time.
And he wants to wait, but he can see that she's
hurt.
Very disappointed and hurt. Hank is a jerk. We don't need to say much more about that. And then I guess he's overcome by, you know what? I love this woman. I'm committed to this woman. I'm going to marry this woman. There's no reason to wait. And so he
come right now,
rushes her across. Yeah. So Myra's costuming is interesting because in this next scene, of course, when he does introduce She's wearing a shawl. I just think about, so in the last episode when Myra came to talk to Dr. Mike about Zach having a job at the saloon, she wore this very pretty, very modest brown jacket that actually really stood out to me because it was obviously not a part of her quote unquote prostitution uniform because Hank seems to dress his girls in a very, alluring, I guess, fashion. So the last episode, she wore this coat. I think it would have been nice if they had let her grab the coat, because I think the whole reason that the mom figures it out is she's like, oh, I recognize you from the street. Why are you dressed like that? In the scene, Myra is wearing this shawl, but it's not covering her. But then later she is gonna kind of tighten it around her neck so that it covers more modestly. And I know that this was a choice because they wanted the mom to figure out who she is by the way she's dressed. But I almost feel like it would have been more impactful if they introduced the mom was excited like she is, but then either Myra or Horace to look at each other and realize that they want to be honest about their whole relationship, and so then Myra reveals it or something, I don't know, it's just weird that the reason the mom figures it out is just because of how she's dressed, which is something that is so easy to fix. But of course Mrs. Bing freaks out on Horace, she's ashamed, she calls Myra a whore, she refuses her blessing, which we've had a conversation about the importance of blessings in this time period with the Matthew and Ingrid wanting to get married episode, so I feel like we don't really need to talk anymore about that, but it went horribly wrong. But I love that they then choose what you think is probably going to happen is they're going to rush, Myra's going to rush out and they're going to break up. That's what I expected.
Oh, really?
To happen. Yeah, because it's so horrible. It's heartbreaking for Horace because that's his mom. For Myra, just realizing not only, does his mom say something you're going to ruin your life like this, but also just recognizing she might never be accepted for anything other than her, quote unquote job. And so I think the most dramatic response would be, oh, they break up here. But instead, Horace is kind of awesome, and Myra's they have a conversation about it where they're
he's I don't care.
Yeah, I so love you. I want to marry you. I don't care what she says. And I could see Myra being self-sacrificing and being no, you deserve better. Right. We can't be. But instead she's no, I love you too. And so they have their first kiss in the middle of the street in front of everyone and they all cheer. And it's kind of
I liked it.
Yeah, no, I love that they kind of subvert my expectation there that this is going to be a dragged out drama. But instead, they're no, we're committed to each other, and this doesn't change that, it is nice. Because it would have been if they had broken up too, it probably would have been too similar to, Matthew and Ingrid, when Ingrid was oh, Dr. Mike doesn't like me, I'm gonna go to Denver, we can't be together, I don't love you, because she was trying to make the sacrifice play and be I want you to have your family instead of poor old me,
right. Right. We're back at the kind of photo gallery. We have Jake, who we haven't really heard much from this episode. He's pointing out a good point that he's had lots of business because everybody's getting haircuts for this picture. And Matthew mentions that he's, had hoped Emily could stick around to make a dress for Ingrid. And now we have a problem because now we've not only talked about how we don't want Robert E., etc. there, but now we don't want the immigrants there. Lauren and Jake are basically who says she's going to be in it? And then there's a whole other conversation of well, why don't we include the Cheyenne? We should include everyone that lives in this town. And if we're going to fight about it, we should let Watkins decide since he's taking the pictures. Jake and Lauren are very adamant about no immigrants, no Cheyenne, no prostitutes, basically.
I went through my notes of all the episodes we've talked about and I couldn't find it. But I have a flashback of someone saying something to one of the Cooper kids about Charlotte being an Indian lover.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I remember talking about it. I could not find it in my notes, and I could not figure out what episode that was from. But I remember having a discussion about it where we said, oh, we didn't really see that, but it was interesting. But then in this scene, Jake's comment when Matthew says, of course we should include the Cheyenne, Jake's comment is, oh, you've been hanging around with Sully too much, which I'm like, I just have this memory that it wouldn't be just from Sully, but apparently people thought of Charlotte as someone who cared about the Indians. And I'm like, and it's not like he's not living with Dr. Mike, who we also know has very strong feelings about the Indians. So I thought that comment was really weird.
I think it's, a bit of inconsistency there.
But then what's really weird is Jake has this line that he's like, no Negroes, no immigrants. And then he touches Matthew's jacket and he goes, no Confederate uniforms. Which I was like, wait, where did that come from? When was that? Who in the town would be, first of all, I know for a fact.
I didn't really catch that.
I know for a fact that in the operation, remember we had a long discussion where they were like, hey, we're all unionist here, and something.
Yeah.
But then to have him say, first of all, who in the town would be wearing a Confederate uniform? When has that ever been brought up? Why? And also, this town is supposed to have not been invested in the Civil War at all. And then he says, no immigrants again, which I guess can make sense that he's trying to make it very obvious. And then he says, no saloon girls, which again, when was that ever in the discussion? I don't know. It's kind of like, what are you talking about, other than the fact that we're flashing back to In the Secret, where I'm like, who are these men that they think that they get to decide everything?
I think that their decisions and opinions run everybody else's. Yeah, it's annoying.
The point of the scene, of course, is that they're being
exclusive.
Yeah. Over something that really, I think Matthew's right, is like, Mr. Watkins is taking the picture, which is interesting because they don't actually ever have Watkins involved in the conversation, like in the whole episode.
I think later.
They don't really.
He says something.
Well, we'll see, but it's a... Oh, but you know what? I forgot. He does say, or one of them does say, like, we don't really mind Ingrid, but if we let Ingrid come, then they're all going to come. So actually, I take that back, because they do just say, like, oh, it's not that we want to exclude Ingrid. We just want to exclude everyone else.
Yeah, but it's like the same thing where they like, obviously they're friends with Robert E., but they use that as a way to not, it's just dumb, honestly.
Weird. It's really weird.
Emily gets married and Watkins is there to take a picture, but he actually has Sully look through the lens first because he thought it might interest him.
Check the focus.
Probably you don't think much about, but we will see that further develop.
Why do you think he picks Sully?
Well, I kind of thought because Sully's been his guide.
Yeah.
He's comfortable with Sully. He's been around Sully. Sully obviously has given some sort of interest into photography, which he mentions later too. So yeah. I think it's someone around that he's comfortable with, that he can trust will do a good job.
Yeah, that's true. Sully's pretty trustworthy and available, I guess. Yeah. Oh, so then there's like this very short scene. Weird. Did you pick up on this? But I think I understand it. At first I didn't get it. So they show Horace and Myra.
Separately.
Yeah, separately. They don't say anything. And then they just move on. And I was like, what does that mean? But I realized the wedding bells. It's the wedding bells. Emily and her new husband, who I don't think we ever get the name. The wedding bells are playing, or are sounding. And so I think it's Myra and Horace reflecting on the fact, I guess, that they want to get married, but it's not going to be the same for them. I guess. That was kind of what I was thinking.
No, that's good. I just thought it was like a weird, like, they're having moments of reflection.
I think they are, but I think the important thing was it was the wedding bells playing.
Yeah.
So then we get Emily and her new husband's wedding portrait.
Send off. Now they're getting sent off.
Do you want to talk about the history of a bouquet toss?
Sure.
My voice just cracked. So, do you know the history of it? Because I was like...
No, why would I? Why would I know the history of
No,
that?
but I just was like, okay, the bouquet toss, the single girls line up, and the one who catches it is supposedly the one who gets married next. I thought that was the history, but it's not.
But it's not.
In the Middle Ages, progressing from Europe, it was good luck to touch the bride.
Context?
Simply because she was married, and so if you touched her, yeah, it would, I guess, up your chances. And so what would happen is the couple, before they went to their wedding night, would have to run through the crowd, and the crowd would basically try and rip off her dress to get a piece of the dress, which was lucky. This is kind of disturbing, actually.
Very.
And so the bouquet toss was created that by holding the bouquet was lucky. She would throw it and it would distract the people trying to,
Rip her clothes off?
yeah. And so the flowers and accessories were to distract so that she could get away to her wedding night. This is the origin of the bouquet toss.
This sounds fake.
I was like, okay, that's kind of insane and uncomfortable, and obviously not the intended thing now, but that's how you can see how then it morphed into this, oh, the lucky girl who catches the bouquet is the next to get married, because there was this idea that a bride was married, therefore she's lucky, you want to touch her. Another thing I learned was that the actual wedding bouquet idea, so tossing it came out of that, but having a bouquet, originally a lot of brides would fill their bouquets with garlic or herbs or spices, because there was a perception that these spices were so potent, I guess, that they were a preventative measure to contracting the plague, because large gatherings, of course, would be when the plague would spread. And then the tossing came with the wanting to prevent yourself from being basically stripped naked in front of your entire wedding group on your wedding day.
Interesting. Wouldn't have guessed that.
Doesn't that make you like, it just makes me not want to do a bouquet toss ever.
Well, yeah.
There's so many, but like
Probably
there's so
not.
many wedding traditions that I think kind of stem from like these
Came from
kind of
weird
negative, kind of sexist traditions. But anyway, the point is though, that is not the bouquet toss that we know, nor the one that I think happens at Emily's wedding, where she throws the bouquet and Dr. Mike catches it, and then she and Sully have prolonged eye contact. Have you ever caught the bouquet, Kelly?
No, I have not. Have you?
I have caught, and it didn't do much for my luck. Yeah,
Didn't
I'm
come
not
true.
A weird thing that I thought of though, where are Emily's kids? Didn't she have a lot of kids?
Well, she definitely had one baby that we know about.
but I know there were more, because remember the kids swallowed the penny or something?
Yeah.
And there were like other kids in the
Yeah,
room? I guess
know.
they wouldn't go on the honeymoon, but I guess maybe someone's watching them. Oh, she had a brother. Did she have a brother? Maybe the brother's watching.
But they did kind of make it seem like, oh, bye, like they'll never see her again, like that moment she
Yeah.
was actually moving to Denver. They did make it
For
seem
real.
like that. Yeah. Let's see, where are we?
Mr. Watkins having a diabetic attack.
Well, he falls, and they kind of show his, like, from his point of view, his eyesight getting blurry. And Dr. Mike gets some candy from Brian and gets sugar in him, probably just because his blood sugar got really low.
Did you find it not believable that Brian didn't know if he had candy or not?
Knowing Brian, yes, you're right. That probably is a little hard to believe. Now, we're in the clinic. Dr. Mike really wants Watkins to stay and rest, but he is convinced that he needs to go, and he has promised people to take their portraits, and he makes a good point in saying that, like, even if I stay here and rest, you're not going to be able to stop the progression of my disease. You can't stop anything from getting worse. So for him, it's kind of like he wants to be able to live his life to the fullest. And that means not stopping to slow down.
He says, at this point in my life, I have very little to look forward to. All I have is what I have left to look back on. It's a more complicated way of saying, like, he wants to live his life with no regrets.
Yeah.
What he does now, he wants to be able to look back on and be proud of. And I think there are a lot of people who live one of two ways, right? They live for the future, they live for tomorrow, or they live in yesterday. And I think he's found like the perfect balance, which I like as a overall theme.
We then get all the portraits he's been taking, which includes Robert E. and Grace, Lauren, Hank and his girls, Myra and Horace, the Reverend, even Cloud Dancing, and Jake.
I love the cloud dancing portrait.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting though? Remember in the scene earlier, Lauren said he wasn't gonna get his portrait taken because they were talking about how everyone looked really ugly.
Well,
and he was like, "I'm not gonna do it."
I don't know if you've noticed, but his character is very easily persuaded.
Wishy-washy.
Yeah.
But I noticed like Olive said she wasn't gonna get one, and I didn't see one that Olive got, which I wonder if like maybe what if they like forgot to take Gail Strickland's portrait, so they had to like write in a scene where she said, "I'm not gonna get it done."
Or it was true to the character, I don't know.
We have this whole chunk of portraits, and then it leads right into the Coopers and Dr. Mike getting a family portrait.
Right.
And I have to note that the way that they've posed them, it's like so obvious that there's like the seat across from Dr. Mike is empty. You know, like they make it so clear. What is this family missing?
Right.
A Sully.
Right. Right. And Brian even says like, you know, why don't you be in your picture? And he's like, no, it's for family. And Brian's like, your family? And Dr. Mike is like awkward about it, where she's like, let Sully make his own decision.
She's giving the horse his neck.
Because secretly she's like, be in our picture. But then she's like, also don't if that will make you feel weird. Because, I mean, we said she just called him family a couple episodes ago, you know?
Yeah, no, she did.
Watkins and Sully are out in the wilderness, and they're talking about progress. Not unsurprising to us, but kind of talks about how things are changing, and when the railroad comes, you'll not only be killing off animals, but also the Native Americans, and how he's watched many people selfishly come out to the West. Watkins actually knows that Sully came out here for silver, which I'm like, when did he learn that? Did he, like, share that about himself? That seems a little surprising.
Yeah, one of two things. Either they've had a lot of time to talk about it, or probably not unlike when Charlotte kind of gave
the rundown.
Dr. Mike Sully's backstory. Yeah, because he's such an interesting person. He takes Watkins to this like beautiful place that the Cheyenne say this is where heaven and earth come to talk. And Sully's been helping him take all these pictures, but it almost feels like he is second guessing the benefit of taking these pictures, because he recognizes that Watkins is literally taking these pictures for the railroad so that the railroad can decide what part of the land they want to dig up and put a railroad through. Because if we think about Sully's history in season 1 of his relationship and his point of view of the railroad, it is almost really surprising that he is helping Watkins. And you think, oh, it must just be because either he respects Watkins as a person, or he's hoping that some of these pictures, and I think especially about like the opening picture, which would have been the representation of the Cheyenne, of the natives, people don't understand, so maybe if they learn, then they'll care. Sully almost says that the word progress, which we've heard used before, I think especially of not the healing, what was Running Ghost, where he and Tate had a conversation about progress on the backs of death and murder and starvation of an entire race of people.
Right.
But Sully says like the word progress is almost a synonym for selfishness and greed. And that Watkins says, well, it's natural to want more. This is so relevant to our culture. And it doesn't have to even do necessarily with wanting more money or wanting more stuff or wanting more out of your relationships and wanting people to serve your needs more. But also, I think about for Watkins, what does that mean? He wants more time to live. He wants more time with his eyes to take pictures, and that as humans, we are wired to want more. But I think it comes down to what are the sacrifices that we make to get that more? Watkins is like, I want more time to live, but I'm willing to pay the time if I get to do things that I'm proud of and I can look back on and love, right? And you think about Sully's perspective might be like, I want more. They're going to bring up the relationship with Dr. Mike. Like, he does want more, but what will he be sacrificing to get that more? Which we had that conversation, I guess, about which one was the one where he, like, didn't want to commit. Like, remember him and Cloud dancing, like, riding, and they're talking about woman troubles. And
which one was that? I don't remember.
There was the one with the hope chest. So I guess Cowboy's Lullaby, because he was, like, wrestling with...
Right. Letting go.
Love, and can you love again, and letting go of the past, and what do you sacrifice for that? And it's interesting because then you think like the Cheyenne as a people, like, are they a people that want more? What is more to them? More to them is their freedom, the freedom to not have their children starving, and their land, you know, being on the land with no boundaries. The railroad and the government wanting more land and more gold, and I don't know, it's just... I'm wondering about it from a modern context. It might be natural to want more, but the what that we choose to want more of, there's always a sacrifice. And is it our time? Is it our mental health? Is it our opportunity to, like, love people? Like, I don't know. I think it's a pretty deep conversation that they don't get too deep into, but I want to get deep into.
No, I agree completely. Watkins has Sully look into the camera once again, and Sully is like, is there something wrong with your eyes? Because I think he's obviously catching on, like...
He's making him check everyone. Yeah.
Right, like, you can be interested, but that doesn't mean I have to do it for you every single time. But Watkins explains that Dr. Mike says he's going blind. He really wants Sully to promise that he'll be in a picture, but Sully says he won't. Then we get a very prominent quote.
One of the only GIFs or GIFs or whatever they're called that is available on Twitter.
Oh,
is him going, I noticed you have a problem with promises. And then Sully leaning on the camera, looking all suave, you know, being like, what's that supposed to mean? It's literally like the only GIF on Twitter.
Interesting. I wouldn't know that. That's funny. But of course, Watkins says, you know, if Dr. Quinn ever looked at me the way she looks at you, I'd get down on a knee and promise her forever.
So cheesy.
Cue the romantic music.
This episode's so interesting because I don't really feel like there's a main conflict. You know, like, even within, like, there's all these mini conflicts. Like, so there's the conflict of who's going to be in the picture, and there's the conflict of Watkins and, like, his time, yeah, and, like, Horace and Myra. But I'm, like, wondering, like, what is the significance of this conversation? Why is it this man? I don't feel like this conversation changes anything for Sully. It doesn't tell him anything new, but... does it make him think that maybe Dr. Mike expects something, or does it make him realize, like, he's got to be honest with her or himself?
Yes.
Or, like, I don't know.
I think it's very important because, I mean, we haven't gotten to the end of the episode yet. It's obviously coming. But I believe if this conversation had not happened, Sully would not have had that aha moment in his head of, like, oh, if other people can outwardly see the way that Dr. Mike feels about me, I should probably have a conversation with her instead of doing what I did do, which was kiss her, and then, like, we haven't had this conversation, which I know in past episodes I've said I'm glad that they don't have to have this define the relationship. I don't think they need to, but I think it is, you get to a point of development in this relationship where there probably needs to be some conversation, or you're going to have mismatching expectations from either party. So I think it's a wake-up call for him to be like, someone like me notices the way she looks at you, even if he doesn't want to talk about the kiss, and just say, like, by the way, I don't know if I've ever told you that I genuinely care about you and your family. Like, I don't know. I think it just brings it closer up in his mind of, like, oh, I should probably have some sort of conversation, which I think is important, and I think Dr. Mike will grow to appreciate.
When they do have the conversation, it's nothing that either of their actions haven't expressed.
Yeah, but I still think sometimes you need someone to say something to believe it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I guess for me, it just doesn't feel like the kiss, felt like kind of revolutionary, right? Like,
Right, but then some people were mad because nothing happened after that.
right. But and so I think the conversation that they're building up to having doesn't feel like they're revealing anything new. Maybe it is
Which
more
I like.
of it's a coming together and acknowledging verbally of where they are standing, but it's not any new information. And so, but we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We can get there when we get there.
We will.
Myra sees Dr. Mike leaving the saloon. No.
Really? Wow, didn't know she went there. What you doing over there?
Myra is outside the saloon and she sees Dr. Mike leaving the clinic. So Myra goes over to Mrs. Bing's room, and this is where I'm talking about Myra's actually like adjusted her scarf
appearance
to like cover more. Textually it makes sense because the mom did comment the first time around, so it makes sense that now she like thought of it, but part of me is like, I don't know why she wouldn't have thought of it the first time, but I mean, it's fine. But I love that we finally get some of Myra's history, which is what I think we all knew all along, that this was not a woman who chose this life for herself.
Right.
She's was the oldest sibling, and her parents died when she was 13, which is nauseating to think like how young 13 is. And she needed to make money to feed her family, and so she did what she had to do to protect her family. And we've talked a lot about back then there weren't many options for women who were not born into privilege to make money for themselves, right? Daughters were under their fathers, and then they get married and they're under their husbands, support, safety, but also control, right? And so Myra, with no husband and no father, what options did she have, especially when it comes to getting money quickly to feed, we don't know how many siblings she had, but we assume it's it's at least a couple. And so there are many stories like this, even today in like sex trafficking, where it's like it was only supposed to be one time, and then we know now that Myra is contracted to Hank, so she's got to stay until her contract is bought out, which is kind of insane also to think about. But it's the sweetest scene because Helen Udy like does all the talking, but it's just everything that she loves about Horace, that he saw past, what her job is, that he has a kind heart, that he's loved her, and that she says thank you for raising such an amazing young man, which is like, I'm not a parent, but I do feel like that's the ultimate compliment to a parent, to say thank you for raising such an amazing child. Yeah. And in the end she says, I love your son and I'm gonna
take care of him,
which I also love, because I love that Myra's not going for the sacrifice play here. Your dislike of my choices is not going to change my commitment to your son, which I think is pretty
admirable. Yeah.
But it's funny for me to say that because I also have a flashback to another conversation where we were talking about that song Rude, where it's like, I'm gonna marry him anyway. And I'm like,
how disrespectful.
Right. This is the same thing, but it doesn't feel like that.
Well, yeah, I get that. It doesn't in a certain aspect. But the whole point of it is she does this while Horace's mother seems to not be awake. But as soon as Myra leaves the room, we see her open her eyes, so she clearly heard the conversation, which is important. In town, they are setting up for the town picture, and this is the conversation we've been alluding to where Sully kind of explains why he couldn't be in the family picture with Dr. Mike and her children, and even though he isn't family, he says, I care about you all, and especially you. I care about you. See, I think you just need to say that. Like, obviously we know he cares about her. The other episode, I'm like, oh, he loves her. He cares about her.
Right, that's what I mean. Like, their actions have said this long before.
Maybe I'm just like, I thought all humans just like needed like that words of affirmation to confirm whatever they were feeling or thinking.
I think you're right. I totally agree with you.
And he does bring up the birthday kiss and said, like, he meant it, which, good job. Probably need to confirm that for her, too. And then she's like, it's the nicest gift I got.
Yeah.
I laughed so hard I ripped my headphones out.
I didn't notice this, but you noticed she gave him an out in the picture where she's like, oh, it's his decision. She gives him an out here and says, but it only has to be a gift if that's what you want.
Yeah.
What do you think about, because I'm not sure what I think about it, what do you think about him saying, because first he says, if things were different, which I'm not sure what is things, if we weren't so different, which
I think that's
personality I understand, but I'm like, I'm not sure what that really means. And then he just moves on to, I'm not ready yet. So I'm like, is that I'm not ready yet canceling out the comments about the different, or
yes,
you think it is?
Well, I think it's a difficult conversation to have. They're not the best at communicating. He's in this place. I think he wants to say, I'm not ready, but he doesn't say that. The first things he says is like, oh, if, like, maybe if things were different, or, you know, maybe if we weren't so different. But I think he's not ready and she's not ready. She says that. I think that's where if you're going to pick, like, the number one reason why they're not, like, progressing things forward in their relationship is that they're not ready. But I think he kind of hides behind these other reasons because it's scary for him and it's still very new and he's clearly not ready. But
yeah. Which I have no problem with that either. Like, them both acknowledging that they're not ready to be in a relationship, which I think makes total sense from just where they are in life right now.
Right.
I think if you take it from him saying, if things were different, if we weren't so different, if you take those as being, he's trying to say he's not ready, but he didn't know how to say it right, and then he does say it, like, I think that makes sense. But if he meant, oh, if things were different, if we weren't so I'm like, wait, what?
No, I agree. And that's why I kind of want to believe that, because normally when people are like, if things were different, if we weren't so different, that's like a breakup. Like, you're not, you know, who's going to change?
Leaving the door open.
Yeah, that's not really like oh, we'll see what happens. That's like in a different time or place.
I don't think there's anything that stands out that they're so different. Like, in fact, it's kind of the opposite, right? They're both stubborn and opinionated, and
yeah, they butt heads, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, if things were different, I'm like, okay, so that could be argued as, like, he's still grieving. Abigail, totally understandable. She just inherited, 3 children, so yeah, totally makes sense that they're not really in a great situation.
And she also, the last relation
dating.
she was in, she lost her fiance. Like, we forget about that sometimes too. So
because they don't talk about that much, but that's a good point. And it's maybe it's notable that they do bring what's his name, David. They bring him up in this episode, not in front of Sully. Anything more you want to say about that conversation?
No, I like it. You know what? You know how you know there's a grown man? When they are able to express their emotions. I appreciate it. I am here for it, and not enough people do it. And so I'm like, even if it's an awkward conversation and he doesn't do it perfectly and he doesn't give all the right reasons, like, at least he had that conversation. I think it's necessary. So good job, right. Sul.
While this is all going on, I think you said they're setting up for the group picture. Watkins has asked Sully to go get his camera and the lens out of his photography wagon, and I don't really know how to talk about this. The immigrants all show up.
There's a big fight.
Yeah, but the thing is, they get in a fight first with Matthew, and then a whole brawl breaks out.
Yeah, and
then, like, Lauren makes this comment where he's like, we were here first, and I'm like, do you want to talk about immigration for a moment?
Yeah. I thought that too. I'm like, do you want to talk about who's really here first? Because trust me, it wasn't you.
Super relevant, even to present day. Like,
100%.
We forget that actually there were people here first, and it was none of the white people.
Right. Yep.
The conclusion, it spooks the horse in the photography wagon, which. What should the suspense be here? It's not just the camera, but there's like a candle or lantern that falls over. Not to mention Sully inside the wagon, which I don't understand how he didn't hear. Like, it feels like anytime there's a fight, Sully's like, I'm there. But nope,
Okay.
not this time. This time he's
on a
getting
mission.
the lens.
He's into photography, you heard.
The wagon tips over, catches on fire. Sully's okay. He gets out with the camera lens, but the camera, and I would assume
Everything
the
else.
majority of the slides that
Yeah,
all these pictures we've seen,
Yeah.
totally lost.
Watkins says that basically nothing he had survived.
Yeah.
And the next day, he's cleaning up this little gallery he's set up, and he says nothing survived, so he's just gonna leave. But he also gives Dr. Mike the portrait, which could or could not have been David. We never really get, I don't know, it's kind of like alluded to that he just said that, but then we don't really know.
Yeah. That happens, and Watkins sees it as a sign to give up. Because he says to Dr. Mike, like, I'll need you to give me the name of that doctor in New York. I guess because he lost his camera. He can't take any more pictures. He lost all those pictures, so he's resigned himself, which is kind of weird. Like, he's resigned himself to get treatment so that he can live longer. Like, that doesn't seem like a bad thing, but I guess he's lost his
purpose.
The thing that made his passion and, his purpose. I just want to point out, there's a portrait of Abraham Lincoln that they show, which that portrait was taken by a photographer named Alexander Gardner in 1863. And Alexander Gardner was one of those 20 photographers that was hired by Brady. And a lot of Gardner's work gets attributed to Brady because, like I said, Brady was the head photographer who hired all these other photographers. So I wondered if Watkins' character was maybe based on Gardner.
Maybe.
It was just an interesting thing because I was like, I want to look up who actually took that specific portrait. Because if you Google Abe Lincoln portraits, there's like hundreds that different people took from his younger years all the way through, of course, the Civil War and his presidency. So
right,
just interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that picture. She invites him for dinner, but before that, Brian shows up and says that Horace's mom is not doing well. While she runs off, Brian says to Watkins, "Robert E. can fix everything. Can't Robert E. fix your camera?" We will continue that storyline. But at the clinic, Dr. Mike comes out of the room and says that Horace's mom is asking to see Horace and Myra, and it's a very sweet conversation. They go in and basically she tells Myra that they have her blessing, that she knows Myra will take good care of Horace. It's a very sweet scene where she basically just gives her approval and says that obviously those things that Myra said touched her. And then she dies.
Yeah. It is a little bit of an abrupt death.
Which, guys, hate to tell you, but in real life, people don't usually say their last words and then just, like, breathe their last breath. Why do I have a fake microphone? I'm not sure why I did that.
Except, Kelly, they do say their last words and then they die. But a lot of times they don't know that they're their last words.
Right.
It's not usually timed so poetically.
Unless you work in television. Then we are at the homestead, though, and Watkins has come for dinner. They're talking about pictures.
Pictures from Egypt, which in 1869, that was when the British were occupying Egypt and the Suez Canal was being completed. Coney Island is mentioned, which Coney Island, the amusement park, wasn't built until 1895, but it was discovered in 1609 by a Dutch explorer named Henry Hudson. And between 1870 and 1880, Coney Island was mostly luxury hotels. And then there's a little thing about bathing suits, which I think is meant just to be funny because Brian's like, I just go swimming naked.
In the nude.
But the thing that's important to know, the invention of the bathing suit can be tied to improvements in the railroad. Because with the improvement and expansion of the railroad, recreational activities like going swimming and going to the beach were something that became a hobby and a norm for people for the first time, because now they could make a day trip to the beach to go swimming. And so, of course, if you're going to go to the beach and make it a hobby, you don't want to take your clothes every time. And so this is where in the mid 1800s, bathing suits were invented, which is kind of fascinating to think the railroad influenced the swimsuit industry. Now, unfortunately, swimsuits are basically orchestrated by the weight loss industry. But then there's like a weird, I don't know why Dr. Mike just says, well, you know, in a lot of places it's more modest not to be naked. But she says, Sully, I think they wear swimsuits because they're cold, right? And he's like, yeah.
I just thought it was like one of those like parenting moments when like you need some backup to like make something sound good and you're like, hey, agree with me.
But why is it weird just to say like most people don't go swimming naked?
I don't know.
And then
Watkins thanks them for their hospitality. And then Sully actually suggests that they fix the camera. They kind of list multiple things that, I mean, a camera, it's just a box with a hole cut in it, and you can get glass, and Dr. Mike has chemicals, and suddenly this whole idea starts to come together that they can make a makeshift camera for him.
Well, and also just pointing out that the most precious part of the actual camera is the lens, which Sully was able to save.
Did save. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
So then the next scene is kind of a compilation of everything I just said, where we see Robert E. making the box for the camera. Lauren donates materials for free, which is shocking.
Do you think, they don't textualize this, but do you think he donates it for free because he knows it's kind of his fault that his hatred is the one that got the camera destroyed?
Maybe, but if that was true, then he wouldn't have this whole thing where he's like, I'm not going if everyone's invited.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's just the stubborn old man character, but...
I was kind of disappointed that they didn't have, like, Robert E. go into, like, MacGyver mode. Like, I'm gonna MacGyver you a historic camera. But actually, like, he makes, like, what looks like a pretty legit, like, camera box.
It looks like the thing he had. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's cool that Dr. Mike has a bunch of chemicals that, like, are relevant to what he needs.
Yeah. They have this compilation of putting together all the camera pieces, and then it looks like the whole town. We kind of meet up with Horace and Lewis, and they meet up with Myra, and Hank pouts because Myra's gonna stand by Horace. And then the first, like, oh, if the saloon girls are going, then it really means everybody. And then we see the Cheyenne, which means really everybody. We see a lot of the blacks in the community, the immigrants, and everyone's gathering
Literally
around.
everyone.
And then Olive is going, and we didn't really get to see what changed Olive's mind, but okay.
No, but earlier she said she didn't, like, she would do the town picture, but she didn't want her portrait taken.
Yes, agreed. But she was the one who was like, only the important people.
That's true. Maybe she didn't know.
Tries to take Lauren's arm. He obviously is protesting.
But Dr. Mike, man, she just knows how to convince people. Honestly, it didn't take much. She, like, barely said anything, and he just, like, took his apron off and came. You know what I mean? Like,
do you know that when we were growing up, Mom used to get mad at me because it would be dinner time, and I would know that it was dinner time, but she would get mad because I would not come until she, like, called me and was like, Sarah, dinner.
why are you acting like this is when we grew up? This still happens.
Okay. Well, thank you for outing me
Not just
like
with
that.
you. No, but not just with you, with, like, anyone if they're, like, at the house.
But Mom would get so mad because she would be like, why do you need a special invitation to come to the dinner table? And I really don't think that Dr. Mike, I think maybe this is supposed to be like a heartfelt moment where she's like, you're the heart of the town. But I don't really think, personally, I don't really feel like that's it. Because I don't think that's true of Lauren. Like, I think he's important. But if she had said, like, you're a part of the heart of this town, I would have liked it better. But she says, you are the heart of this town. I almost feel like for Lauren, maybe it's that he just wanted someone to want him there.
Right.
And to acknowledge that it wouldn't be complete without him. Like, he wanted that special invitation, because that's basically all she does, is she's kind of like, we really need you in this picture. You're the heart of this town. We want you in it. And so then he's like, okay, since you noticed, I will come and get the picture.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It really doesn't take much, but he does come.
And so the large group, they've all gathered. Sully checks the focus.
And then he said, I'm not quite ready. Hold on.
And then when he climbs down, do you notice he like adjusts his clothes a little bit? Like he wants to make sure he looks good?
Oh, yeah. I noticed. Yeah, I mean, everybody else is dressed to the nines, let's be honest. And then he comes and stands next to Dr. Mike and puts his arm around her shoulders.
Yep.
And Watkins says thank you, and then they take the picture, and they kind of scan to show everyone, the African Americans, the immigrants, the Cheyenne, but also like the prominent people in town, showing all of them individually, and then at the end they show the whole picture.
So the first time I rewatched this episode to prep for the podcast was the same time where I was in the airport, and I got emotional at this part where they pan over everyone.
Right.
This season kind of ends, and this could have been the end of like Dr. Quinn, right? Like it kind of seemed like they didn't know if they were gonna get another season at this moment. You pan over all these people and you're like, oh, I've really come to like care about all these people, and seeing that it's made up of such a variety. And it's not just the town, it's Dr. Quinn the show. Like it's basically showing you everyone we care about in the show.
Everyone. Yeah.
Watkins is the audience, kind of being like, thank you for being a part of my story.
That's nice. I didn't think of it like that. That's nice.
That's what I wonder, if that's the buildup of all these pictures, if they didn't know if this story was going to get, more telling or, expanded on, and just snapshotting these characters and these people, and that you as the audience have become so invested in, to have that final shot be all of them. And of course, then it zooms in on Dr. Mike and Sully, which kind of, I guess, could, if they had ended there, could give us a hint like, hey, their story isn't done, whether or not we get to see it or not.
Yeah.
I do like that ending.
I think it's my favorite scene. If we're going to jump into like favorite scene, that is my favorite scene.
Really?
I just like showing everybody individually, like even just getting close to their faces, but even characters like we didn't know. You know what I mean? Like there's like a couple with a baby, and showing the Cheyenne on their horses, and the immigrants, and obviously I really like Sully, even though he said like, I know I'm not family, I really care for you all, and like we said, he showed that in action, but he's, I feel like, reinforcing the conversation he had with her by showing in his actions that he feels care for them, and he just outwardly shows it. I like it. And you know what? This is why I like this show, because freaking TV, now when you watch TV, it's like 3 episodes in and they're saying I love you and they're sleeping together. And I like that this is slow. I like that we've had a whole season and we've seen this slow progression of them, and there doesn't have to be any like, oh, they're finally together, or any resolution. Like it can just be, we care for each other, and leave it at that. I like that. Stuff on TV is never like that anymore, let's be honest.
No, it's true. With these characters on this journey, and saying that and knowing that everything that came before it already proved that. Instead of like now, like modern TV is like, oh, they've slept together. That's how we know that, okay, now they're actually gonna do life together. That's not romantic. It's not realistic. Nope. And also, I'm a teacher, so I always think about young people and the portrayals of relationships and sex and all that kind of thing. Like, what are we teaching our kids? We're teaching our kids that sex is the ultimate expression of love, when I think that actually it's not ultimate at all. Intimacy comes far more deep than just physical connection.
Right. Would you say your favorite scene was the end too, or?
I was just thinking about it. I don't know. I think it's really odd to pick it out, but I actually really like the scene with Myra talking to Mrs. Bing. I just
I thought you might say that, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I like when characters dig deep.
Yeah.
And I just like appreciate that their storyline didn't become soap opera-y, because it could have very easily.
Yeah.
There's a lot to like about this episode, even though, I think I started off with, there's definitely some problematic stuff in this.
Which I know that I like to play devil's advocate and stuff, but I do agree with what you're saying. Yeah. I think sometimes I just am like, Do writers really think that much into things? But I mean,
Well,
you know a lot more than film.
If
they
don't, they should. Right. That's the point.
Right.
If they
and
don't,
I respect that. I respect that. So, I mean, yeah, I definitely like this episode, and I think it's a nice way to end the season, but
it is.
I'm not ready to like rank it number 1 or anything.
No, agreed. What's interesting about this episode is there isn't a lot of high stakes conflict, which almost means it's a pretty slow episode.
Right.
I think it's kind of beautiful that they, in a way, took this story and took out the need to push and said, hey, let's look at people and look at relationships. Like, that's what this episode is about. It's about relationships. It's silly because it's over a town picture, but the discrimination and the hatred. And, like, I love the symbolism that this fight, and they don't really talk about it, and I kind of wish they would, but this fight breaks out. And not only does everyone lose, because no one gets in the picture.
That's true.
But also innocent people get hurt. Watkins loses his entire livelihood. Like, we don't let him grieve that enough. I have a hard drive with basically every picture I've ever taken in my life. And if that hard drive, if I would like lose all the pictures on it, that would be devastating. But back then, where you had one shot to get a good picture, now he was totally innocent in that whole thing, and he lost not only his camera, which is the thing that makes his livelihood possible, but all those other pictures, the slides, and it gets resolved. But I feel like we don't realize there's a huge symbolic message here of like hatred and discrimination and turning against your neighbor. Not only do you all lose, but also innocent people get hurt.
Right. That's a lesson right there. You can include that in the lessons. Yeah.
So ranking. The big thing to know is that our next episode is going to be our Roundup episode, where we're going to take a look at the ranking again, because I think I already have some changes I want to make to our current standing. Yeah. However, do you have any thoughts on where this fits for you, or what you would liken it to?
I'm thinking probably like if we're going to divide it in halves or something like that, I think I would probably put it in the upper half. But I don't know if I don't really have an episode in mind that I'm like, oh, this reminds me of that, or I would watch it again like I would watch that. You know what I mean?
For me, I think the closest, it's kind of like Law of the Land, in that we have this outside character show up, and then there's some disputes in the town that this character kind of ends up in the middle of. It's not quite as high stakes as Law of the Land. What do you think about this one? We can like work our way up or down. What do you think? Do you this one better than Law of the Land?
I think I would probably put it above.
Okay.
I'd be more likely to rewatch this versus Law of the Land.
What about The Prisoner or Running Ghost? Running Ghost obviously is a big focuses on the relationship of Dr. Mike and Sully. And The Prisoner is definitely high stakes. Like that one is, life and death for that one.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure I would put it above that. I realize how much I rely on you to figure this out.
I mean, I would kind of agree. I do think I like it better than Law of the Land. I personally think The Prisoner is pretty, as far as like our lead characters go, is a pretty powerful episode.
I agree.
And Running Ghost, I feel like we get a lot more development on Sully. I know The Great American Medicine Show is not a fan favorite, but I still think it's one of the strongest episodes that they have as far as like emotional weight. If we would put it above Law of the Land, it would be the new number 10. Which it puts it kind of more or less smack dab in the middle.
I'm good with that.
I'm going to write it down because I keep forgetting the last couple times. Wow! Kelly, we just finished our last season 1 episode.
That's pretty wild. I can't believe that.
We've been at it for, 9 months.
9 months.
We basically had a baby.
Oh my gosh. I can't. Next episode is our baby.
Yeah, so actually, the Roundup episode, I think we did a lot of talking about the Roundup episode in The Secret, but for those who may have missed it, our Roundup episode is going to give us the opportunity to look back on season 1 as a whole, and we did reach out to you guys to tell us all your superlatives for season 1. Best guest, best quote, best relationship, best moment, weirdest moment, worst moment, all the superlatives that you can think of that you would like to share with us about season 1, we are welcoming. You can keep an eye on our social media for questions if you want to write in. But of course, always our email is the best place to contact us, which is notaladypodcast@gmail.com. We're also looking for, if you have trivia questions, you want to try and stump us, see what we remember from season 1, which I feel like in this episode I was like, I remember talking about this thing, but I can't remember when it happened. I did that a couple times this episode, so this goes to show that it's in there, but it's starting to mix together. Any thoughts that you guys have on Dr. Quinn season 1, as well as Not a Lady season 1? We're also looking for, if you listen on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please write in a review. We're looking forward to reading and sharing those in our Roundup episode. And of course, the cream of the crop is if you want to send us via our Anchor profile page. Anchor is our base streaming service. Anchor has the opportunity where you can record a short little voice message and just say, "Hey, Not a Lady Podcast, we've listened to all your episodes," which is crazy. We appreciate you guys so much. We appreciate your time. Of course, don't forget, we will be taking lessons for
this episode.
Portraits, which we will also include in our Roundup episodes. So lots of opportunities to write in. We love hearing from you guys. Do you have anything else to add, Kelly?
No, I think I put a little sneak peek before, but there may or may not be some musical features on our next episode. So if you're into that, stay tuned.
Yes. We have a lot of exciting things planned for our Roundup episode, so we look forward to chatting with you guys there, and we will keep you posted on the pacing of that episode. We kind of got off our bi-weekly posting, but,
Thank you for everybody's patience and understanding once again.
And we will see you in our season 1 Roundup episode.
Woot woot! See you guys next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Not a Lady Podcast. If you like this episode, you can always support us by reviewing, liking, and sharing our content on social media.